Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is Shay Stautz, Republican congressional candidate for CD2 here in Southern Arizona. I really appreciate you joining us for this Zoom webinar on COVID-19 treatments and technology. This discussion will be about what's in the pipeline to help us, both from a treatments perspective, but also from a technology and testing application. I want to make it clear, I'm thrilled to have our guests with us, and they're both very distinguished, but their participation in my webinar here does not imply political endorsement. So this is not about politics. This is about providing you real, solid information from folks who have the expertise to present that. And so I will just tell you that these two guests, one in particular, Dr. Ray Woosley, I've known for a considerable amount of time in my experience at the University of Arizona, working in Washington, D.C. My second guest, Dave Tellenfeld, is the head of a very promising startup company with a prototype in development that he'll tell you about. And from that perspective, Dave, why don't I ask you to introduce yourself, and then followed by Dr. Ray Woosley.
Thank you, Shay. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you, everyone. It's funny, Dr. Woosley, I met maybe a decade ago as a graduate student, starting my first company with the University of Arizona Technology. So it's fun to be here all these years later. This is my third startup. I'm a serial biotech entrepreneur, and we have an exciting technology from the College of Optical Sciences at the University of Arizona, under development at the Center for Entrepreneurial Innovation at Gateway Community College in Phoenix. It's under contract with the Air Force Research Laboratory and funded through AFWorks, which is a testament to the pioneering work of Dr. Will Roper, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, whose reforms to procurement are making it possible for us to get state-of-the-art technologies like this to the people who need them more quickly.
Thank you, Dave. Ray?
Thank you, Shay. It's a pleasure to be here, and even if it's not an endorsement, it's a pleasure to be with you, a good friend for many years and respected. So thank you for your willingness to serve. And thank you for the invitation to be here, because there's a lot of confusion in the medical community, a lot in the public, and in the medical community, and a lot of fear. And I hope we can allay some of that fear. I'm a physician by training. I came to Arizona 20 years ago to be dean of the College of Medicine at the great University of Arizona, where I met Dave Tellenfeld. And I stayed on to start the Critical Path Institute, and more recently start another nonprofit, the Arizona CERT, which focuses on the safe use of medicine. So I'm still on the U of A faculty in the College of Medicine in Phoenix, and also on the faculty here in Tucson. So I've still got Arizona roots. I've still got basketball tickets, and I'm glad to talk to the community I love and respect so much. So Shay asked me to start off by giving a sort of a gestalt of where we are right now. We've never been here before, obviously, and even the epidemic of 1918, the flu epidemic, was so different than what we're having right now. It's different in many ways. The technologies that we have today are really encouraging and are going to make a difference. The ability for us to talk. Can you imagine the fear in 1918 that you hear that 2 weeks ago there were 500,000 people who died, and it's still happening. We have instant communication, which helps and harms. So we need to, like any tool, we need to use it and be aware that it can be misused. But I also think back to the days of the AIDS epidemic when it began, and we didn't have any drugs, we didn't have any treatments. That's really going to be our model for going forward. Back then, the scientists went to the shelf and found what are the drugs that we have on the shelf now that we can be that are being taken for other purposes that might help. So we found AIDS drugs that weren't perfect. They had a lot of side effects initially, but they did slow down the progress. And today we have outstanding treatments, and we're still working on a vaccine, but that's going to come too, I'm sure. So for this horrible pandemic, the coronavirus that's causing what's called COVID-19, that viral illness we're still learning about it, but its hallmark that makes it so dangerous is the rapid ability to be transmitted. And that's one of the biggest problems, because unlike 1918, we communicate, we move, we interact with each other more than ever before. So we have 60,000 people in a football stadium, or we did, or a basketball tournament that brings millions of people together. So that like happened at Mardi Gras can really infect a lot of people very quickly. And that's what's really different. But we are looking at drugs that are on the shelf right now. We don't know that they'll work. We hope they will, but they're being tested, and we will learn hopefully soon that some of those medicines will work. There are vaccines that are being tested right now. Those take a little longer. Drugs take longer too if you have to start from scratch. One of the treatments that I think has a great deal of hope, as more and more people get infected and survive, their plasma should be able to be given to other people to help them when they're really sick. So for me, that's one of the most exciting aspects of this. And people are donating their plasma right now. If they've had the virus, they have the antibodies, and hopefully those antibodies will be able to save lives very quickly. So I'll stop there, but I'd be glad to answer any questions, Shay.
Ray, before we move on, so talk to us a little bit about the Red Cross's blood drive out there. We've seen ads on TV saying we need people to give blood. What happens is do you have to know you've already had the virus and no longer have it, or are you tested when you go, or are you tested at all, or do they test it after they take it? What's the process there?
The Red Cross always have had a very rigorous screening process for blood donors, and they're really suffering now because people can't get out to donate. So if you can, we encourage you to, because people still have need for blood transfusions. And when you volunteer, they'll check you for a fever, they'll check your blood for antibodies, they'll check for your to see if you have evidence of the virus in your nasal passages. So they'll do the screening, and I wouldn't hesitate. If I had to have a transfusion, I wouldn't hesitate to receive it, even though a lot of people today are asymptomatic and carrying the virus.
Okay, so they test you when you go to the Red Cross. They test you before they draw your blood.
Well, they probably test your, go ahead and draw your blood, but save it until the tests are completed.
Oh, okay. And this is related to what Dave is going to talk about, but how long does that test usually take right now? What's the state of the art?
Well, they vary, and I'm not sure what the local Red Cross is using here in town, but usually it's a day or two. Some of the newer screening tests are 15 minutes, even shorter sometimes. But those tests haven't been as rigorously evaluated. All tests have some percentage of false negatives. So the longer the test takes, usually the more reliable it is. And none of these tests have been through the usual FDA clearance process. They've gone through an accelerated process. But so the Red Cross is going to use the most reliable test that they have available. And a day or two may not be too long for them. Okay.
So is it a good idea to advise people to, certainly we want people to give blood, right? We want to advise folks to do that. For folks that are wondering if maybe they've been exposed to COVID-19, is that also a good way to find out if they've been exposed, is to go get in line to give blood and be tested that way?
I wouldn't, there are better ways to get tested, I think. I wouldn't use it just to get tested. I think it's important that people who can donate blood, and if they've been a donor before and they're one of the, they have the type of blood that is really needed for transfusions, definitely encourage them to do so. But there are multiple reasons to become tested. If you are wanting to go back to an essential job, being tested is going to be very helpful. But if you're just curious as to whether you've been exposed or not, I would continue to stay at home and protect yourself and protect your relatives, and wait until the tests are much more readily available. We'll go through two different phases where we test the people who are delivering healthcare, because we want to make sure they aren't carrying the virus. And we'll test people who've been recently exposed to see if they need to be quarantined. But broad scale testing will take a while. The other kind of testing is to start to identify people who have had the infection and have the antibodies, so they can go back to work and can take over some essential functions in our society and start getting the back a portion of our population back to work.
Okay. Okay. So are there other places to go get tested other than Red Cross right now?
I'm not aware. I assume you could go to Banner, your hospitals. Your doctor can refer you to the hospitals for testing. I've been told, although I'm not sure it's up and running right now, that Sonora Quest has the test available, but it's generally when recommended by a doctor. And the CDC has criteria that they use for doctors to recommend testing.
Okay. And let me leave it this with you, Ray. You mentioned vaccines in the pipeline will take a little bit longer. What little I know about this is, excuse me, there were some pharmaceutical companies that had developed or were working on vaccines against previous coronaviruses that could, in theory, be easily applicable to COVID-19. And with your extensive history with working with the FDA and getting pharmaceutical treatments through the process, given that we've got folks working on this already, what's a reasonable estimate for we might see a vaccine in X number of months?
You know, the first treatment for AIDS was approved in 48 hours, the review time at the FDA. So that's not the problem. The challenge is finding evidence that the products work and are safe, and that just takes time. I would say it's going to take at least 6 months for a drug that works, and we don't have one yet. So we've got to find the drug first, and then we've got to have 6 months. We've found vaccines that seem to work in the laboratory, and they will take 12 to 18 months to know that they're effective and safe. So that's the kind of time frame we're talking about. The ability to use plasma, though, is already with us. We don't have evidence that it's working, but that is moving much faster, and I think has greater hope of being feasible within weeks and months. It'll be in research. It is in research right now, but I think within weeks to months we'll be using plasma from previously infected people to save the lives of others.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you. So 12 to 18 months then is a reasonable time to be looking for a vaccine.
Exactly. And I think we have to be prepared for this. It seems to be getting better. We have to be prepared for the fact that it can come back. So we need to work to get these treatments available when it comes back. Okay.
So that's a great segue to Dave. Let's talk about your company and the technology that you're trying to bring to bear for this unprecedented situation for us. Let me just start by saying, of course, we saw the Federal Reserve chairman today make remarks about what he saw as necessary for us to move out of this phase and to bring the economy back up. And his comment was that can only happen once we start to do universal testing. And I know that's the capability that you're trying to bring to market. So tell us about your company briefly and about your technology and what you see for the coming months in that space.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a good segue. I am limited in the promises I can make, but I can speak in general terms about some of the things I look forward to in the longer term future. So this is unfortunately not something that you're going to see out in the consumer world in any significant way this year. But we do have an opportunity to transform not only how universal screening is performed for this particular situation, but also in the longer term how medical triage operates broadly, because our technology is inherently portable, scalable, and to borrow your word, universal in potential application. So to give you more context, maybe we should talk about what is currently available, what the sort of gold standard testing modalities are, and what some of their shortcomings are that we hope to address. So predominantly right now, if you want to detect something like a virus with a high degree of confidence, you are probably going to use a polymerase chain reaction PCR kind of a machine, which takes a fragment of the DNA that's present in the virus and amplifies it through a chemical process such that it's present in sufficient quantity to be detected by some other means. This works very well and historically has been something that's been done in a laboratory, like most medical diagnostics still are today. And the primary shortcomings, a good example of it, trying to leave the laboratory is Abbott Labs' most recent device. It's about a 7-pound unit, and they hope they can get a positive result in something like 5 minutes and a negative result in something like 13. That's exceptional. If accurate, they've really done some great work there. I don't know that the data exists yet to fully evaluate that. But the intent is to take what is traditionally a very expensive, very time-consuming, and location-restricted, personnel-restricted activity, and make it more broadly, more universally available. And we have the same goal. One of the things that you have to be careful with if you want to field something rapidly that has broad applicability is that when a new threat emerges like this, we are potentially many weeks away from being able to design, develop, manufacture, and ship a sufficient quantity of the reagent-based tests that are currently used. So having a small portable testing kit still is not a solution if it requires unusual expertise on the part of the operator, or it requires consumables that are hard to come by. So developing and then mass producing these things is the challenge right now. It's not that they don't exist or we don't have good ways of doing this. It's when there's a novel threat, it just takes time to rigorously develop and validate new equipment. So
Dave, sorry to interrupt, but so what is your best guess? I mean, if you had to say that the majority of the hospitals here in Arizona were using a testing kit, what is that testing? How are they testing now? And you talked about a mobile test kit, and I'm getting the sense from you that that's the future direction that we're moving to. Describe that in as plain as terms as possible. Politicians like me, we have to have things explained to us in the simplest possible ways.
Okay, so yeah, predominantly polymerase chain reaction tests are being used, and Dr. Woosley can probably speak more broadly than I can about that. But if you just think about in an ideal world, how and where would you be able to test? You would want to envision a future where testing could happen not only at the hospital or the clinic, but at the field point of care, maybe at the airport, maybe at the school, maybe at the government office, maybe for first responders and law enforcement to operate in a portable, instant kind of a way. So what we're doing at our company is developing the underlying technology which will enable that future. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but we have a real possibility, particularly if the fast track processes are used, of laying the foundation to be prepared such that we do have portable units which don't require reagents, which are operable by a non-medical professional subject to minimal training, which are optical in nature. So in other words, a laser shines at the sample and that signal is digitally interpreted. And it's a very exciting prospect because it enables us to not only do it quickly and portably, as many of the more recent entries into the market are able of doing, but it also provides an adaptability, a speed of adaptability, and also a range of capabilities that are significantly greater than what is currently possible. So one of the problems with the current tests is the slow speed of adaptability. So you may have a fantastic instrument that in theory can detect a new viral threat, but you have to develop the kits and the consumables, and that takes many weeks. And so the instrument is inherently capable of detecting the virus, but it can't adapt quickly to detect a new threat. Now contrast that.
So Dave, let me just make sure I understand here correctly. So right now you're estimating that when people go to hospitals for tests, they're getting tested in what's probably an immobile large machine that requires specialist training in order to operate. And also you mentioned things like reagents and other materials that have to be available for that test to be conducted there. Where the direction that you're talking about, that we need to be heading to, where we need to be in the future, is smaller, more mobile machines where specialist training does not need to be, where people operating the testing device do not need to be quite as specialty trained, nor do they need these other materials like reagents that go along with the test. And to your last point, it also needs to be more agile so that it's not just testing for the last threat, but also testing for future threats. Did I get that right?
Right, absolutely. So imagine a future when, let's say, an unusual pathogen is detected in Wuhan, and it appears to be spreading rapidly. So what you might do in that instance is take a sample from an infected person and run it over to a laboratory. Now, if that laboratory had devices like those we are actively working to build, then you could take that sample, place it into the device, analyze and characterize it, and code for it to the extent that the ability to detect the pathogen is now digital. It's an electronic sensor package that operates in a novel way, and the ability to detect the pathogen of interest in the future becomes a software update. So to the extent that these can be made from commodity materials in the future, from off-the-shelf parts that are present in many electronic devices, someday we will be able to detect the virus, characterize it, and transmit that data globally to instruments that can be not only in medical offices and hospitals, but someday in places like airports, and then maybe even someday in the palm of the consumer's hand in the smart device. And we're a very long way from that. But I will spend probably the next decade of my life realizing that dream is successful, and we're working hard on it. And we have a lot of, we're grateful for a lot of help from the military, including the Arizona Department of Military and Emergency Affairs, the National Guard,
Right.
with whom we aspire to validate this technology in the field.
So, David, we've just got a few more minutes here left, about 3 or so, but in 15 seconds, tell us just a little bit about your company, Botanosols, and how long you are specifically away from deploying a prototype for your currently Air Force funded initiative.
Sure. Well, we have prototypes. They are operating in laboratory settings. I wish I could make the process go faster, but optimistically, if given the appropriate resources, and I think those are likely to be forthcoming, we can play a role in helping to contain and mitigate a resurgence of this virus, maybe in the fall or winter. That potential is real, although I can't overcommit there.
Right. Okay. Well, good. Thank you for that, Dr. Woosley. Before we sign off here, one of the questions that gets steered in my direction quite a lot is is about masks. It's about face masks. Everybody wants to know what's effective, what's not. In a very short summary, tell us who needs to have the N95 masks and what do the rest of us need?
Healthcare providers are really in need of the professional protective equipment to do their job. So I do not encourage people to wear a mask. I encourage them to stay home. If you have to go out and you have any kind of a cloth mask, especially a medical mask, you should wear it knowing that it's not the best protection. We were talking earlier, most of the viruses that you get are either somebody coughing right in your face or coughing on something that you then touch and then get the virus on your hand and then you touch your face. So that's why hand washing is so important, because by doing that, you remove all the viruses that you've picked up from the banister or when you go to the grocery now. But again, I think the really key messages are stay home. If you have to go out, which you will occasionally, but only do it minimally, wear gloves, wear a mask, and dispose of those after you get back. I would not be competing with the healthcare professionals for those very important N95s that are essential for their safe doing their work. I would also throw in one very quick comment. Don't take any medicines thinking that they're going to work to help you unless your doctor advises it. A lot of people are exposing themselves to harm, and some people have died taking medicines to prevent COVID when there is no evidence that anything can prevent this virus right now. So I just urge caution, but also encourage people to know that the kind of science that Dave Talmanfield is working on is there. It's helping us more than any other time in our lives. We've got more resources, so we'll get through this. We'll get through it because of that science and because of the communication that we can carry forth, like today, that lets us know to stay home.
Thank you, Doctor. Dave, one last question for you that came through from our audience. Are we likely to ever see, or at least in the near future, at-home testing kits?
It's a great question. This is my third startup company, so I know what all the vicissitudes and probabilities look like. But I will say that I have staked my finances and reputation on making sure that happens. So I believe we have the technology that will make that possible. I believe it is possible to put it on a chip in a smart device in the far future, and I'll be working hard on it.
But it doesn't sound like we should be looking for that anytime soon.
Well, don't hold your breath, okay. But but maybe look forward to it. So, you know, don't count on it in the immediate future, but, you know, take heart that some of the smartest people in the world, including those like Dr. Woosley at the University of Arizona and elsewhere, including RPI and Harvard, are actively working on exactly that. And my hope is that we will see something like it in 3 to 5 years, and that we can meaningfully improve the situation on the ground in the fall and winter.
So, so we're out of time, and I can't tell you how much I really appreciate you both joining me for this discussion. And I hope that the message that we've communicated here is that, as you pointed out, you both pointed out more than once, we are going to get through this. There are some things that we have to do in order to get through it, and that there are treatments, including vaccines in the pipeline, and technologies like you're working on, Dave, that are going to help us get to that end state and come out on the other side here. So thank you very much. I couldn't be more honored to have you both join me for this discussion.
It's been a pleasure, Shay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, so I think I stopped the video.
All good politicians know when there's a live mic.
Yes, I'm still learning that. Okay, so I guess I have to end the meeting, Ray. So I'm going to do that. So I'll lose you when I do that. But let me just say thank you very much.
My pleasure, Shay. Good luck.
Okay, I'll give you a call. I'd love to recap a little bit.
Okay, I'll be
thanks.
around. Bye-bye.
Okay.